Welcome to the Spirit-Led Men at Work podcast, where I interview Christian men from all walks of life with varying job titles who have one thing in common. They are all choosing daily to be led by the Holy Spirit at their work. And because of that, they are leading, prospering, glorifying God, and experiencing joy and purpose in their work. And you can too. Men at Work, welcome to episode 14. Before I get to my interview with Jeff Bradford, I wanted to give you a heads up. There's going to be a significant change in this podcast, and I'm not going to get into the details of it right now, but in the next episode, I am going to explain what the change is and the reason for the change. In a nutshell, right now, just so you know, I'm not going to be publishing an episode every other week. It'll be less frequent than that, and I cannot commit at this time to you what that's going to look like. And also, the accessibility is going to change. You will not be able to get this podcast through iTunes once I make this change. You will be able to access it through my blog, but my blog is also changing. So again, I'm not going to get into all the details right now, but instead of just waiting until the next episode, I wanted to give you a little bit of a heads up on that. And let me just tell you that the way you're going to access the podcast in the future is going to be at this new location for my blog, which is going to be spiritledmen.wordpress.com. So it will no longer be spiritledmen.com. It'll be spiritledmen.wordpress.com. Okay, let's get on to my interview with Jeff Bradford. Jeff is a business leader with almost 20 years of experience owning and operating businesses. After learning about Human Coalition in 2010, he was so moved by the organization's mission that he left the business world to work for them full-time. I was introduced to Jeff after I interviewed Kirk Condrich, who also works for Human Coalition. And so we're going to talk more about this issue of life with Jeff, and he also has a powerful testimony. So without further ado, here's my interview with Jeff Bradford.
Jeff, thanks so much for joining the podcast today. And I wanted to just start with the same question I always ask everybody, which is, tell us a little bit about when and how you became a Christian.
Well, Dave, I grew up in what I would call a fairly traditional Christian home, and I was baptized when I was 12 and considered myself a Christian throughout my middle school and high school and college years. But it really wasn't until after we had our first child that I really began to see what it was to truly serve the Lord and not just be a Christian from week to week, but truly living for the Lord as your Savior and walking and really serving the Lord every day.
Yeah, I could see how children could make that change.
There's a sanctification, but it really was just really coming to a crossroads in my life. I think I fell away from the Lord as many folks do in their college years, and really after I got married and we started really getting involved in a church, that I began to really serve the Lord and truly understanding what it was to be a Christian man.
Well, that's great. I've read a little bit about, your career and the businesses you've been involved in. Can you tell us a little bit about the different businesses you've been involved in and kind of how you got involved with them?
Sure. I went to the University of Texas at Austin and got a finance degree, and after college went to work for IBM for A number of years, and from there I left that to start my own business and was a business owner for 17 years, a company called Cross Media that we did commercial print, college textbooks, and really moved that in even to some internet work towards 2010 after some of the internet work, but had that business for 17 years and sold it in 2010 and started doing some consulting work. A guy that I had hired that we also helped start a church here locally was a CEO coach, and he and I worked together to really work with small to medium-sized business owners to help them grow their business and really take their business from their heart to their head. And really begin to run that as a Christian business owner. And so we did that for a number of years. And that's actually where I met Brian Fisher, who's the president and co-founder of Human Coalition, where I work today.
Oh, you met him through that business?
I did, through the consulting business. I met Brian when his firm, Brian was the COO of a large marketing communications company here in Dallas, and met Brian through that. His company hired my consulting firm and got to know Brian through that.
Okay, well, now I was introduced to you through Kirk Condrich, who my interview was on episode 9 and 10 of this podcast. And I was so moved by that story that I decided to share my testimony relating to abortion at the intro to that interview. And Kurt had said that you had a testimony that he thought that I should hear. So you want to kind of walk us through that, please?
Sure. You know, if you guys remember, I mean, in 2008 and 9 especially, and even into 2010, as business people, you really know that those were some tough business years. A lot of things going on in the business climate. My wife and I had also helped start a young startup church, and my wife was the worship pastor. I was the lay pastor. Essentially, when we weren't running our business, we were at church helping grow that organization. And for about 8 years, we helped start that church. And in 2010 is when that church kind of got split up. It was through a long circumstance, but another pastor came in that was trying to help our pastor, but there was just something wrong. And as much as we tried to warn our pastors something wasn't right with this gentleman, he ended up really just kind of bamboozling a pastor. And we found out later he was wanted by the FBI. He was preying on other small churches. But through that, the church got split. And my wife and I found ourselves in Christian counseling. We had really ministered to everyone else through that 8 years, really working, night and day in our business as well as helping start that church, and kind of lost our church family. We had led home teams and just kind of was feeling like, hey, I think we need to go in for a tune-up for our marriage. So we went into a Christian counselor, and I'll never forget that day, the first day we went in there, we closed the door to that counseling office. My wife began to cry just uncontrollably. And I thought, oh my gosh, what had gone on? And I thought maybe she had been abused as a child, or there was something else, or maybe our marriage was just in a lot worse shape than I thought. I was really kind of perplexed as to what was behind these tears. I had never seen her cry like that. As we really peeled what was behind those tears, it came down to a decision my wife and I made nearly 25 years ago now. We were engaged to be married and really weren't serving the Lord. I'd come out of college and really moved away from the Lord and was in sexual sin. And my wife and I got pregnant during that engagement. And I went to my father, who I was close to growing up. My parents had been divorced, and I think out of my father's ignorance, just thought this wasn't a way to start a marriage, and before you knew it, we found ourselves at Planned Parenthood. And we took the life of our first child. And we didn't talk about it, Dave, for 17 years. It really wasn't until that same week, Brian Fisher, the co-founder of Human Coalition, it was called Online for Life at the time, handed me his business card and said, we save babies from abortion using technology and the internet and business practices. And as the Lord would have it, my wife are in counseling that same week, and it was really the first time that God dropped the scales from my eyes of what abortion was. And I saw from now a husband and father of 4 what it had done to my wife for many, many years. And it was, I think we both felt like, one, it was the unforgivable sin. Our pastor didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about it. My wife had really grown bitter through the years on this issue. Every woman is created to give life, to protect life, and as men, we're supposed to be that knight in shining armor who protects women and children and life. Think about how much as a nation we go around the world to protect life outside of the womb. Right. And yet, as a young man, I was not bold or courageous. In fact, I was the opposite of that, and allowed our child to be taken from us. And, as a Christian man and father, that's one of the hardest things, I think, for men to realize, that they didn't have the courage to stand up for my daughter at that time. And so we went through that counseling, and as God would have it, Brian handed me that card that week, and I began to explore what abortion really was. And to be honest with you, Dave, I couldn't believe that as a Christian nation, as Christian men, as the church, that we were allowing 3,500 of our citizens to be slaughtered every day. And I thought about it in terms of, gosh, if ISIS was blowing up schools at 3,500 children every day, do you think the church would be rising up to end it? And yet we were allowing this Holocaust, this silent Holocaust, to occur every day. And so that was really the beginning of my awakening. And it started with my own family and with my own heart and really seeing who I was, and having to deal with that both at a very personal level and really even beyond that as a national level and as a church. And so that was the beginning of our awakening, and we began seeking healing through that. And it was really tough. It was very tough for my wife. Those are sometimes our wounds. We want to just push them down. We don't really want to deal with them. We just want them to go away. And yet God, in His grace and mercy, allows us to deal with those. And when we then deal with those in ways that honors God, and He uses our testimony to allow us to stand in the gap for others. He allows others to be rescued through our testimony. And it really was that day, that week, that I began to fight for life.
Did you have some trouble being bold in your feelings, as well as advocating for pro-life, based on maybe some guilt from your experience? Were those feelings at all that you kind of went through?
I think initially, for 17 years, I was afraid to tell anyone. I was so ashamed that I had taken the life of my child, feeling like it was the unforgivable sin, mainly because nobody talked about it. Pastors didn't talk about this in winsome, graceful ways. And so we're sitting in the pews thinking, man, we have committed the most egregious crime in the world, and because we didn't understand, and we hadn't dealt with it from God's healing. So, yes, for 17 years, and most people who abort their child either go silent or they become advocates for abortion. And so it wasn't until really Human Coalitions I began to talk to Brian, where I shared my testimony, and he really encouraged me. And I didn't see it before, that it was my testimony that was going to save lives. And so I didn't see necessarily in the beginning the purpose of even sharing that with people until Brian encouraged me that your testimony will encourage other men, and that will allow healing to occur through men. And I can't tell you, Dave, how many people come up to me after sharing my story now, of men saying, you know what, I've compartmentalized this. I haven't dealt with this in years. And, thanks for sharing that and being bold to do that. So that has, encouraged me that I can help through my testimony, because at first I didn't see that.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm not at all suggesting that that you should feel that way. It's more coming from my own experience, and maybe the experience that other men might have. And I just think the devil will use whatever he can to make us feel like we're not worthy to share the truth about something. So that was kind of what was behind my question.
No, I totally agree. I think that the enemy uses shame and guilt, and I think that's really the purpose, right? I mean, and how do we begin to awaken Christians across the country in winsome, graceful ways and forgiveness? And I don't think it is until we begin to talk about this in ways that are healing and graceful. And I think this is where we're hoping to really awaken the church to talk about this, because it is when we hide behind our sin and we don't bring it out into the light that the enemy uses it against us, and it does make us feel like I did and my wife did for over almost 2 decades.
Right. It's kind of interesting. I didn't realize until we spoke, all the details around your testimony. My testimony included the fact that I did not continue to be with the woman, in the future. And so I didn't, sometimes I thought, well, if I was with her, maybe we could have worked through that and healed together. But then I hear your story. You were with your wife all those years, but you weren't talking about it, and so the healing wasn't able to begin, I guess, until you did. Is that fair to say it that way?
It is. I mean, I think men compartmentalize things, and there were only times I thought about it. I think women deal with it in much different ways, and I think this was a real insecurity for her that was driven by my lack of standing up for her and the life of my daughter in ways that women say, and this is the fallacy, of these women's marches and stuff, is that women really do want men to stand up and fight for them and pursue them and say, you're worth pursuing, you're valuable enough to do what's hard, to do the tough things. And that was what I regretted the most, is that I didn't have the character and the courage to do that at the time. And honestly, I didn't have people in my life that stood in the gap. And I think that's what Human Coalition does for so many folks, is stand in the gap and say, hey, you can do this, and we're gonna walk alongside you to do it. So yeah, it's a very complex issue.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk a little bit about Human Coalition. And you did mention about how you met the leader of the organization. Can you tell us a little bit about exactly what the organization does, its purpose, and what kind of activities it's involved in?
Sure, and our mission really is to make abortion unthinkable. Very much like Wilberforce made slavery today is unthinkable. It still occurs around the world. We still see evidence of it, but there is no logical person that believes slavery is thinkable or that should. And so we believe abortion is that same kind of Holocaust that's happening today, and we set out with the mission of making it unthinkable. And so, we're a group of business guys, and in fact, God brought 3 business men out of the business world and started this organization. And we thought at first we were just going to be the best at connecting with what we would define as abortion-determined women who are actively scheduling abortions. The Internet was a divine opportunity, really a Roman road, if you will, to women who were planning to abort their child, meaning actively looking for locations, best pricing, and questions around that. And the Internet searches were over 1.8 million searches every month in America for women who are online looking for that information. And so we thought we could just be best in the world at connecting with those women, having them call us before they aborted their child. And so our original name was Online for Life, and we were basically a lead generation organization in the for-profit world. How could we be best in the world at connecting with women online and getting them to call the best pregnancy centers around the country and rescuing lives that way? We have a mantra that says if we can't measure it, we won't do it. But if we can, we should be able to improve it. And one of the, and a lot of nonprofits and even businesses have trouble measuring things. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence out there, or things in business, even thinking our customers are really happy or that we have 90% on-time delivery. But unless we have data and science and facts behind that, we don't know. We can think it all day, but do we know what's really working and what's not? And so we really set out on a lab environment to really prove what was working and not working, and what were the true hurdles to reaching women and saving lives. So we have set up now a series of labs, if you will, kind of McDonald's kitchens in these areas. And then we are then rolling those out. So at a really high level, we have 6 labs, and I'll just run through those real quick. We have a marketing lab that we now take calls from all over the country and partner with pregnancy centers. We own and operate 7 of our own what we call women's care clinics. But that divisions really is how do we connect with women and have an opportunity to speak into their lives to help them before they abort their child. We then also started our own call center as a lab in Dallas, where we take the calls for the pregnancy centers and for our own, where we book the appointments right into them. And what we didn't realize is most of the pregnancy centers across the country were not equipped to really handle these difficult calls. We did a study that showed that only about 3%, and it was really less than that, of those women who were planning to abort were ever calling or coming in contact with a pro-life pregnancy center. So that was the biggest problem that we were trying to solve, is that we were not actually talking to the women having the abortion. So how can we end abortion if we're not actually talking to the women who are having it? So we went to reverse that. And that was really the beginning of what we were doing. So we had the marketing lab. We had a call center that we began. We do about 15 scientific tests every year to figure out ways that we can break down barriers to reaching women and getting them to come into the pregnancy centers. So we actually started our own pregnancy centers because we weren't seeing a huge increase in the number of lives being saved. We were sending more and more of these very difficult cases to our partner pregnancy centers, but we weren't seeing the level of life decisions increase. So we started our own back in 2014, and we started really professionalizing and changing those to emergency room environments. And so again, today we operate 7 of those. Those clinics are rescuing between 5 and 8 times, 800% increase in life decisions in those of the most difficult cases, because those are the only ones that we count are abortion-determined clients. So our own women's care clinics, we're looking to build a network of those across the most abortion-riddled cities across the country over the next 5 years or more. We also have a continuum of care, which is how do we then, once the emergency in the life is averted and the life is rescued, how do we walk with these women And so we have professional care counselors who provide a plan, and then we formally partner with the best resources in that city from what we call continuum of care. So from maternity homes to job placement, to food, to alcohol and abuse counseling, and really design a professional plan to walk them through to healing. Our church outreach division, which is our fifth division, is really working with the local churches to bridge the gap and walk alongside these women. Also, their job is to help educate and activate the churches on speaking about this issue, really awakening the community. And then we have a sixth lab that we call kind of incubation services, where we test and optimize things, other areas, government, working with policymakers, looking at fatherhood initiatives, looking at legal means to really lower the incidence of abortion and look at ways to really heal the community and change culture from that standpoint. So, long answer to that's what we do. We think it's revolutionary. We've seen an incredible impact. We're breaking glass ceilings in those areas, and really encouraged about the ability to really move into a city and change the dynamics, rescue women. Dave, 98% of the women who come in who are already decided to have an abortion, they're actively, within 24, 48 hours, scheduling that abortion, changing their minds and saying, thank you. I just needed somebody to step in and come alongside and know that I can do this. And so we're seeing a sea change of those kinds of decisions, because women really they don't want to take the life of their child. They know it's a baby. They just don't feel like they have any other choice. And so we're starting to give them hope again.
How would you describe the way that the pro-life movement has gone about this issue since Roe v. Wade? If I just look at it from the outside, kind of what I've observed, there were some negative things in the news, like some kind of crazy people blowing up abortion clinics.
Right.
And then, there's legislative efforts to change the laws. What has worked and what has not worked, in your opinion, over these years?
Well, that's a great question, and as we said before, it's a complex issue, and I agree with you. The marketing of the pro-abortion factions and the mainstream media have brought out, obviously, the fringe people that do the things that make pro-life have a bad name. It has a terrible brand, to be honest with you. And when Brian first introduced that he was pro-life and what he's doing, I had those same thoughts. Like, what are you doing? Are you a fringe activist, or what are you doing? And I think one of the biggest opportunities we have is really to change the culture in the pro-life into a brand of mothers and fathers, of caring human beings who love life, that we value every life, no matter the circumstance, whether they were born with Down syndrome, whether they were, born in a low-income environment, whether they were born in a high-income environment. Every life is valuable no matter what circumstances brought you into the world, and that we value all life at every stage. And so we are a country that values life. It's for some reason we've got it into our heads that this is not a life. This is the way every Holocaust has been justified, whether it was the Jewish Holocaust, slavery, that these are less than human. And we know today that that's not true. It's just a stage of development. They're a young human, they're a small human, but they're no less human. And so we have to protect them. I think it's an evolution of really where the church is. I think that we have to take this from a very logical, compassionate, graceful stance, and I think there have been a lot of missteps in that area. I don't think the pregnancy. So after Roe versus Wade, we had the abortion clinics and we had pro-life pregnancy centers. I don't think, and out of no ill intent, I think the pregnancy centers just weren't set up to win against a billion-dollar, what's become over the last 100 years, a billion-dollar competitor in Planned Parenthood. So, they are a very centralized, highly focused, strategic, well-oiled machine. You've got 2,500 pregnancy centers across the country with different ways of doing it, different boards, different religious backgrounds, and no real best practices on how to really compete against the abortion machine that Planned Parenthood and this is. So we have to professionalize really the care and the network to where we are giving best-of-class care. I mean, if you were the CEO of ending abortion in America, what system would you set up? And it has to be one that really takes care of women who do it in graceful ways and do it in professional ways. Not always putting religion up front, but putting it in the back end of when we walk with them, helping them find the Lord, but not necessarily. We want to be best in the world at rescuing the children, meeting their needs. And then our model really is then in the continuum of care, walking with them as Christ would and bridging them then into their faith community and being the hands and feet of Christ. And so being it, not necessarily putting that up front, but being a friend and meeting their needs. And so we think that model is where is a successful model. We've built a scalable approach to where we're really centralizing a lot of the services so that we can provide best-of-class, internet marketing, the science, the data, the research that's necessary, the kind of care that's necessary to really compete against, a billion-dollar competitor. We don't need to be $1 billion, but we need to be, there's no Planned Parenthood's research arm, which is called Guttmacher today, is a $14 million research arm. Their research arm is bigger than any pro-life organization in the country. It's sad.
Now, what I'm hearing is your organization's not focused on maybe you might say the political activism side. It's focused on reaching the women, helping them with this decision. Is that a pretty accurate way of saying it?
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to boil it down, there are about 1.4 million abortion-determined women every year who have already, before they got pregnant, made a decision to have an abortion. I mean, as soon as they figure out they've already made that decision, I'm having an abortion. Our target market is that specific person, and how do we winsomely, gracefully, and do it in a large enough scale to reach enough of those women to help them understand there is a choice of life.
Now, the reason I'm asking that, and I hope you don't mind me asking this question, but this is something that's just kind of puzzled me, I guess, a little bit, and that is the fact that, and this might be a little controversial, I guess, but the truth of the matter is that the Democrat Party is strongly pro-choice.
Yeah.
And that can vary with candidates, or more so maybe on the Republican side. And so you've got certainly a lot of Christians, sincere Christians that vote Democrat.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking in particular, for example, the African Americans in this country, statistics show that they vote overwhelmingly for the Democrat Party, and yet, there are so many wonderful, sincere Christians in that demographic. What would you say? I guess maybe there's two questions I have. One is, how do you explain that? Maybe I know everyone doesn't vote on just one issue, but how do you explain maybe how Christians can vote against a life? That's the way I look at it when you're voting Democrat. That's just my personal opinion. Mm-hmm. And maybe a second question is, how do you reach out to those Christians, and do you talk to them maybe in a different way than you would the general population as a whole?
Yeah, those are good questions, and there's a lot to probably unpack there. But I do think we've got into identity politics where people are voting on certain issues and really neglecting others. And I think for the African American community, many have been blinded and really haven't understood the epidemic of abortion. And in many of those communities where there are lower socioeconomic conditions, there are much more difficult situations of childcare and jobs and those things that they are dealing in those areas. And it's not just African Americans, but anyone in a lower poverty area. And many of the women that we see in our continuum of care, are below the poverty level. And so as the church, as Christians, we need to be ready to stand in the gap to help them through that crisis. And so for many, they just don't see another way out. And I think have justified that and believe the rhetoric and that they just haven't done the investigation to understand even where Planned Parenthood came from, that this was a eugenic society against African Americans in the country. This started after the Civil War. They haven't done their homework on really the abortion epidemic and how it started and still how it disproportionately affects African Americans and other minorities. And I'm sure you've heard in New York City, more African American babies are aborted than born. So I think this is an area that God needs to drop the scales from all Christians' eyes, and many are turning a blind eye, and many pastors are turning a blind eye to this issue of life. I mean, it's unfathomable to me that if you're a Christian pastor that you're not talking about the value of life. And again, many think it's a political issue. It is not a political issue. It is a spiritual issue. And we have to be ready. I think many churches have really stopped talking about cultural issues and doing the work of the church to reach out and walk with women and be that helping. And the government is filling in those voids with programs and welfare and all those things that really link those voters to those programs that they feel like they have to be in that party because they feel like that's the one that's giving them the help. So I think there's a lot of confusion there.
Yeah, I agree. All right, I would like to transition into our what we call the spare round, where I'm going to ask you some specific questions related to work. Okay. And my first question is, what do you think is the greatest misunderstanding that men have about their work?
I think for men it's really hard to realize that we don't own it, we don't control it, and that we're not in charge, and yet we have to show up every day and do work with excellence and do it with in ways that glorify the Lord. And so, I think those are hard for us and sometimes confusing. But we have to know that it is, God's in control, and so we have to be on our knees at the same time, be ready to roll up our sleeves and do what's hard and do what seems sometimes impossible. And rely on the Lord. And, I think for me, as a business guy, that those were always, and even as a nonprofit, to know if the Lord's going to provide. It's He who's going to bring supporters and awaken the church to end this Holocaust. And so we do our part, but we know God's in control.
All right, my next question is, Jesus told us to love our enemies. Can you describe to us a difficult person you've worked with at work and how you handled that and how your faith was a part of that?
We can all be difficult at times, right? I mean, and, we're all challenging. And I think it is, as being a Christian, is realizing that we are all broken, and that, that we're not better than anyone else. And it is that grace that we need from the Lord that we have to extend, to others, and understanding, that it's through that grace and, just unconditional love, if you will, that really does change in people's hearts. And so, at work, I think it is giving that grace and not getting too caught up in ourselves or actions of others, but understanding that sometimes people just misbehave, and giving them that opportunity and that grace, and not holding grudges and not being passive aggressive, but going to your brother and just saying, hey, what you did upset me. Can we talk about it? And working through that, and just having the courage and boldness to do that in love, and working through some of those things. And so, we've all had those challenges with people, and I think realizing that we all have different strengths and weaknesses, I think understanding those is really important. The people that you work with, what are their strengths, and what are their weaknesses, and how do we work as a body? I think sometimes we don't even understand ourselves in those ways, and the more that we understand ourselves of what we're really good at, and not trying to be everything, but really working in our right-handedness, if you will, the things that we're good at, and realizing we don't have to be good at everything. And sometimes I think as men, we feel like we have to be good at everything, and it's hard sometimes to let other people, do the things that we're not good at.
It makes sense. All right, my next question is, what do you think that the average Christian man should think about? Let me phrase this a different way. Is it important for men to do well in their work, and why?
Well, I think it's extremely, important as Christians. Colossians 3:23, 24 says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as your reward." It is the Lord Christ you are serving. And so, I think that's a key verse for us at Human Coalition, and we think about that our work glorifies the Lord. And and he talks about that throughout the Bible. And there's nothing wrong with a good hard day's work that glorifies Him and does it in excellence. But also knowing that like I said before, that we're not in control of that always, and those are sometimes, I think, hard for us as men to know when to let go and not hold on too tightly, and have that clenched fist on, and allowing to have that open hand in everything that we do, and knowing that the Lord is at work. So does that answer?
Yeah, no, that's helpful. It is helpful. I mean, it is true. I mean, there's a fine line, I guess, between doing your best and also not trying to control every aspect of our work. Mm-hmm. So I think there's two separate issues there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right, my next question is, can you give us a tip that our men can take and apply to their work in terms of sharing the gospel?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways people do that at work. When I owned my own business, people knew we were Christian. We did a Bible study and allowed people to come into that wanted to, and also let people know that if they weren't a part of that was okay too. I think as Christians, it's much more, about what we do, not what we say, and being willing to do the things that are just the simple things about caring for people, about encouraging people, giving hope, and speaking life into folks. And so, sometimes that's hard at work. We're under a lot of strain and pressures, and so, being able to zoom out and be that light for folks so that people ask you, gosh, where do you get that faith from? And then being able to share with them. And so that's been, more my philosophy, and seeing the folks that I've really admired is just seeing that there's something different about them, and where does that come from? And versus folks that are always, a little more vocal, which I think being vocal in the right times is always appropriate. But if there's ever a question, just do it and walk the walk and let people see it. Is where I think us as Christian men need to lead.
Sounds good. Now, the Bible has a lot to say about our finances, and certainly our finances are a part of our work. Can you share with us one or two principles from the Bible relating to money and finances that you think are really important for the average Christian man to be aware of and to live out?
Well, as you know, the Bible talks more about money than just about anything in the Bible, and how we handle that is a testament of our faith and of our character. So there's probably nothing more important than our finances. And I think as men, if we're honest with each other, it's probably one of the things that a lot of us, are think about the most. We have families. We have a lot to provide for, and we want, to be able to send our kids to college and help with that at times, and be a part of some of those things. So I think those are all, good things. But I think at the end of the day is what it really kind of talks about throughout this is realizing and giving ourselves a break that, we don't control it, we don't own it, that everything's on loan, and that we are just to be stewards of it. When we realize it's not ours, it does change your perspective of things, and yet, those are tough things for men. And I think having, men around that you have other men that can speak into your life, and you speak into other men's lives, are important things when it comes to these areas of finances and money and being spirit-led. These are all areas that I think we need for men to sharpen other men in these areas, and so I think that's the best advice I could give.
That's good advice. Now, this has been a pretty, you might say, a serious topic that we've been covering today, and a lot of times as men we can be maybe too serious at work, myself certainly included. But can you share with us a joke that our listeners could take with him to work and share at the workplace to try to lighten things up?
Yeah, sure, but I have to be transparent. I had to look, I searched long and hard for a joke because I'm like you, man. I'm probably, if that's one area, I like to have fun, and we use sarcasm at times with the folks that you care most about, and you tease them and stuff. But jokes are not my biggest. I had one, and then my wife brought me in one right before I jumped on the phone with you. So here I go. So this new guy just right out of college was reaching the end of an interview. The human resources officer asked a young engineer fresh out of MIT, "And what starting salary are you looking for?" The engineer replies, "In the region of $125,000 a year, depending on the benefits package." And the interviewer inquires, "Well, what would you say to a package of 5 weeks vacation, 14 paid holidays, full medical and dental, company matching retirement fund to 50% of salary, and a company car leased every 2 years, say a red Corvette?" The engineer sits up straight and says, "Wow, are you kidding?" The interviewer replies, "Yeah, but you started it."
Okay.
See, I told you I'm not great on jokes, but hey, I thought for all the business guys out there, we might appreciate that.
Yeah, I can see how that could come in handy in many applications. So that's a good one. Thanks for getting out of your comfort zone and sharing a joke.
Yeah.
All right. What is your favorite scripture, or you might call it your life verse, and why?
Well, there's a number, at Human Coalition, we actually memorize Scripture, and there's a number of those that we memorize. Proverbs 24:10 through 12, where it talks about rescuing those who are taken away to death and holding back those stumbling to slaughter, is a great one. We look at Ephesians 4:1 through 6, and Colossians, as I mentioned before. But, when we first, one of the first scriptures that we memorized as a group was Psalm 139, and we memorized the whole. It's a very long scripture, and we memorized that, and every week we, as a group, we recite these and remind us of what that is, and if you'd like, I think it's a really good one to meditate on. And Psalm 139 says, "You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down, and you are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me." It says, "Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wing of the dawn or settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you, and the night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you." And then here's the pro-life portion, especially. It says, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body, and all the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious to me, God, are your thoughts, and how vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of the sand. When I wake, I'm still with you. If only, God, you would slay the wicked away from me, you who are bloodthirsty. They speak of you with evil intent, and your adversaries misuse your name. Do I not hate those who hate you, Lord, and abhor those in rebellion against you? I have nothing but hatred for them, and I count them as my enemies. But search me, God, and know my heart, and test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way of the everlasting." And so, there's obviously the scripture that God knows us before we were born. He ordains life from conception to end of life, and He's ordained those days. And it just shows His omnipresence, His omniscience, that He knows every thought before it's on our tongue, that He talks us to be brave, that He knows that He goes with us to the far side of the sea, and no matter where we're at, He's with us. And to embody integrity, to take courage, and to know that He's with us, and that He knows us, every hair on our head, that He's ordained our whole life. And so that's one, especially at Human Coalition, that we meditate on, that we think about, and we know God's with us, and that He will never leave us nor forsake us. But that we also have to ask Him, lead us to the everlasting way, lead us in the good way, help us to make those right decisions, and be for Him. So that's probably the one that we try to meditate on quite a bit.
There's so much in that.
Yeah.
In that you read. It's I have found that memorizing scripture, I've been doing a better job of that. It's so helpful, because when you recite them over and over, it's almost like it speaks different things to you than when you've read it the first time. So
yeah, that's so true. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that's one of the benefits, and just getting it in your heart. But yeah, every time you read it, it's alive.
Yeah. All right. A lot of our listeners are trying to leverage their commute time back and forth to work. Can you recommend any resources that our men could listen to as they go to work and come back home? Well,
I mean, there's, specific resources. there's so much out there. I mean, listening to podcasts like this, I mean, to educate yourself. I listen to online sermons. A guy named Matt Chandler is my pastor here in Dallas, and the Village Church, and they have an online app, and you can listen to those. And I listen to his sermons, quite a bit, going back and forth. I think memorizing Scripture and using that as a time to meditate on that Scripture, and just speaking it out loud, in the car, and those are all, to me, great resources. So much more available today through the internet and different ways. But those are I think, some great ways to spend your time on your way back and forth to work.
Thanks for that. Do you have any final thoughts for us before we wrap this up?
I just say to the men on the call that are listening that I think as men, we need to stand up for life. God created us to be men, to protect life, and to really pursue our wives and daughters and our children and others' children, to treat them as our own and to care about every life. And so I think it is time for men to get more active in the life movement. I think many men think this is a women's issue. This is as much as a man's issue as a woman's issue. We have a lot of part to play in this. In fact, 60% of all abortions are coerced by men. And so I think it's time to end this once and for all. And I think men need to play a huge role in that, and really leading their family, leading their church in this way, and getting involved. So I would just encourage folks to get involved in this issue and use your testimony, and don't, as we talked about before, don't allow the enemy to say that things that you've done in the past, or that you're not equipped to do this. You are. So I just encourage men to be a part of it, and we'd love to stand with you guys on doing that. Use your business, use your resources, your knowledge, your experience to help us end abortion.
Jeff, if anyone wants to reach out to you, either learn more about what you do or what Human Coalition does, or just contact you for a conversation, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, the website is humancoalition.org, so you can find us there. And if there's an email, my email is jbradford at humancoalition.org, and so feel free to reach out to me. There's also ways online we have a help desk. People can ask questions there as well. So we'd love to serve you in any way, and appreciate you guys. There's also Brian is a prolific writer. He just has a new book coming out talking about abortion, the ultimate exploitation of women, and really how men were involved in this, how they really started the issue of abortion and promoted it, and the sexual promiscuity that it allows men to get away without having the responsibility. And so men can help in this Holocaust. And so I encourage you guys to pick up that book. It's on our website. He's written a couple other ones. One's about the church. He's terrific, and they're just well-researched, so they're very factual as well. So I think you guys will enjoy picking up those and learning more about what we do.
Sounds good. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it, and
you are
have
welcome.
a great day.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Men at Work, I hope you've enjoyed this interview as much as I have. We've just heard about Jeff Bradford's journey being spirit-led at his work. Each of our journeys are unique, but hopefully you've heard something in this episode to inspire you and give direction for your own personal daily work life. You can find links and other information from this show at spiritledmen.com/014, or you may just go to spiritledmen.com because there's a new format that's coming for this podcast. Until next time, have a great day and God bless.